Episode 37 of the B Money Beastin' Podcast. I am here with Arsen Aleksanyan. I got it right, didn't I?
You got it.
All right. He is the director of combat sports for Nuway Combat. He is also a 3-time Fargo All-American, a 2-time Armenian World Team member, cadet, Greco, and junior freestyle, and he was a captain at Michigan State. So, man, we got a lot to talk about here, and I think we'll just start at the beginning. You've been all around. You put out some awesome technique content and advice and things on social media. Let's start at the beginning, man. Let's talk about your wrestling journey that led you into coaching, that led you into Nuway.
My dad was a wrestler. He was a 7-time Armenian national champion wrestler. So growing up in Armenia, I talked about this on my Instagram. Growing up in Armenia, every male I knew was a wrestler. Everyone had cauliflower ears, so I just wanted to be like them. So from time I was born, I wanted to be a wrestler. I can't remember exactly when I fell in love with wrestling, but I just know that from the time I remember myself, I wanted to be a wrestler. And my dad got me into it. And biggest thing my dad did for me with wrestling is never pushy or never, talked about winning or doing this. All he did is made me fall in love with the sport. If I had a loss, if I had a bad practice, if I had he always talked about improving, loving the sport, and just sticking with it. And that's my dad did a really good job making me love the sport.
That's something that's missing a lot in today's culture. Is these crazy, and I post about it a lot, the crazy wrestling dads, that, you gave up a takedown in practice, the world's imploding. So that's a very healthy introduction to the sport of wrestling from your father.
Yeah, it is. I watch coaches or parents, when their kid performs poorly at a tournament, they start off with reprimanding him right away, yelling at them, or just, you did this wrong. No kid wants to have a bad performance, right? And the dads will say, well, I know he can beat that kid. He just didn't. That's correct. He didn't perform well. He can beat that kid. But instead of yelling at him, try to figure out why he didn't have a good performance. What is it what happened where he didn't perform the way he performs in practice? And if you figure that out, it's going to be a lot easier for you to coach the kid and help him to overcome whatever the obstacle he had. But if you start yelling at the kid, especially younger kids, for not performing well, they're going to start thinking, what happens after the match? They don't want to be yelled at. They don't want to be on that long drive back home from practice, from tournament, where their dad's going to be yelling at them the whole time. So what that does is that freezes up a young kid. It's going to freeze them up like, I don't want to lose. I don't want to lose. My dad's going to yell at me. And that equals to bad performance. But if the kid knows and understands, hey, regardless of how I wrestle, my dad's going to love me. My coaches are going to love me. What do I need to do to win this match? Most kids, I shouldn't say most kids. I think every kid wants to win every match they wrestle. So how do we get them to compete at the best of their ability? And I think it's got to come from positive encouragement and a lot of love. But as soon as you start yelling at a kid for losing, you're going to lose them in the long run.
Man, I agree with that. When my son was young, I was a little bit like that to a point. And it was like, dude, what's going on? What happened? And it was instead of, and I'm looking back at that as I've gotten older, if I would have looked back and said, okay, why did he just kind of freeze up? Why did he not pull the trigger? What, that's those things that people don't talk about enough within the sport of wrestling that, you got kids that burn out at a young age because they're wrestling, for one, so many matches in a year at such a young age, and they're constantly under pressure from their parents and coaches. And, you got this whole, and I want your opinion on this. You got this demographic, and you'll see it because you run these national tournaments of these coaches, these travel coaches that go all over the country and build these super teams, right? And I seen an instance once, and it made me really unsettled. There was one of these super teams and this other super team, and they wrestled at BAC a few years ago. And one of the coach's kids lost, and while they're shaking the opposite kid's hand right after the match, he's like, hey, man, we need to talk after. I'll get you on my team. So the other kid, he's recruiting over top of the kid that he has on his team. And you're talking about like a 10-year-old kid.
Yeah.
So when you have no security at 10, like it's this, and you got the parents trying to fit in on these teams. Oh, I want to get my kid on these teams. Like, what's your thought on that demographic? Like,
when you look at parents or travel coaches that act like that, it's a really different type of group of coaches that do things like that. And then you look at guys at our tournaments. We have Brendan or Doug Schwab would bring his kids to our tournaments. Brendan Egan would bring his kids to our tournaments. Jordan Burroughs and those guys organize teams at our tournaments. Brendan Schwab and Doug Schwab and Brendan Egan have not organized teams, but Jordan Burroughs organized teams. And you watch those guys, the way they interact with their own kids is way different than parents that have only wrestled in high school that have never wrestled. It's just clearly day and night difference the way those guys approach the sport, and those are some of the best D1 coaches in the country, right? Jordan Burroughs, one of the best wrestlers of all time. The way he talks to his kid after win or loss, or the way they approach their coaches on their team is way different than some of the dads who've never wrestled, maybe wrestled a year in high school, where like, you're going to be tough, you're going to do it this way. And I think they're really missing the point. If you don't really understand the sport, you're gonna make decisions like that on your kids, and I don't think it's always the right decision to treat the kids like that. And there have been successful coaches doing it that way too. I know a handful of them that have never wrestled. I'm not knocking on parents who've never wrestled that are coaching. That's not where I'm going with this. But it's also worked where parents are really tough on the kids, made them wrestle, and the kid ends up doing well. But I think for every one example we see, I know hundreds and hundreds of those we don't see where the kids get burned out and parents get become too much of a helicopter over the kids, and they put way too much emphasis on winning than developing.
It's funny you brought up Jordan Burroughs and Coach Schwab and Eggum. Man, for one, I love listening to Coach Schwab's speeches on Instagram and things. He's such a brilliant human being. But I got a scenario like that too that I've seen up close and personal. Steve Hamilton wrestled at Iowa State in the late 80s. He was a 4-time All-American, and his son, they just live a few miles from us. His son and my son are really good buddies. They grew up wrestling together and stuff like that. And Billy, he didn't start even wrestling until he was, I think, 10 or 11. And dude, he placed third at NHSCA last spring, and like he's a hammer now, right? And Steve never really got on him at all, ever. And I think there's something to be said for those guys. And he wrestled on a couple of these, freestyle teams and whatever Steve did over the years. And he was at Foxcatcher for a month or two back in the day. And he's told me stories and stuff. But there's something to be said for these guys that do it at the highest level and how they approach it with their children. Because it's completely different than, like you said, like a dad that wrestled in high school. Because, dude, like I was at Freestyle Nationals a couple years ago, Kids Nationals, and Bryson was there wrestling, and we seen Jordan Burroughs there with his son, right, up in Utah. And you're right, man. He just has a different approach. I watched it from like afar, right, just how he handled the situation. And, man, there's something to be said for these guys that do it at the highest level and how they translate to their kids. So I'm 100% in agreement with you, man. Everything you said was exactly what I've witnessed. That's completely on point. But we can let's maneuver into you, man. You're from Armenia, correct?
Yeah.
So how did you get from there to here and to Michigan State? I think that's interesting. And who coached you along the way?
My parents moved to U.S. when I was 13. The reason for their move to move to a better country with more opportunities for me and my younger brother at that time. There's 3 of us now, 3 brothers. My middle brother, Arsen Aleksanyan, he wrestled at the University of Nebraska. He was ranked top 3 in the country for a while. He was Jordan Burroughs' teammate. The team took 4th at NCAA, so my brother wrestled. I wrestled. My youngest brother wrestled for a little bit in high school. But my parents just brought us to a better country. Lived in LA for about a year or so, moved to Orange County. I went to Calvary Chapel High School. I have a legendary wrestling coach there, John Azevedo. We won when I was in high school. My sophomore, junior, senior year, won state 3 times. Our high school won 11 state titles. And then from there, I ended up, obviously, I didn't speak any English. So I really struggled in school, and especially in high school. So I went to junior college after high school, went to Morrow Park College, had another legendary coach there, Paul Kisa. Back up to John Azevedo. John Azevedo he was a U.S. Olympian, 3-time All-American, a national champion for Bakersfield. This was back where D2 champions could wrestle in D1s also. So he was a national champion, and he ended up coaching at Cal Poly University for a long time. So anyways, that's my high school coach. Moving from him, I went to Morrow Park College, where my college coach was Paul Kisa, NCAA champion, 2-time All-American. He was my coach there for a couple of years. We won a state title with Paul Kisa also. And I think he's coaching at Fresno City College in California. California has its own community college system wrestling. And I think Paul has won over 20 state titles over there. And from there, I got recruited to wrestle at Michigan State. And Dave Dean, actually my current boss right now, he's the one who recruited me out of Morrow Park. And rest is history.
Man, it's funny you brought up the junior college thing in California. My partner in B Money Beast and Quantal Langford, he helps coach Palomar.
Oh, yeah. What's his name?
Quantal Langford. This is his first year, but officially first year. But he was out there helping him in a jiu-jitsu gym for a few years, like kind of under the radar. But yeah, he's out there in Oceanside.
Yeah, so that's right by me. I live in Poway.
So that's close to Oceanside?
Yeah, it's really close to Oceanside.
I'm going to have to connect you guys, man. He's awesome. He's actually from out this way where we're at. He grew up out here, and several years ago, he took off to California, him and his wife. He told me, I keep trying to talk him into coming back and coaching and stuff, and he's like, man, I'm used to the water, dude. But I found that interesting that he explained to me how, like, the junior colleges in California kind of have, like, a state tournament.
Yeah, they do. It's only for, only California junior community colleges. The head coach there at Palomar is a guy named Tim Box, who's a state champion in California, really tough wrestler, and he's doing a great job. He also does a lot of sand wrestling. I think he's the head coach for USA Wrestling for beach wrestling. Sorry, not sand wrestling.
Yeah, I see some of his reels from time to time, man. Yeah, it's really cool though. Like, I talk to Quantal pretty regularly. We work on Mat Clash and things like that, and he was telling me he started tagging me and stuff where he was coaching. I'm like, dude, what's going on? He's like, yeah, man, they hired me. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So, but that's pretty neat, man. So for Michigan State, you said you're working now for the former head coach at Michigan State with Nuway?
No, he was assistant coach. His name is Dave Dean. He started Nuway. He started the company while I was in college at Michigan State. Anyways, Dave, his kids, he also has 2 kids that are NCAA champions, Max Dean and Gabe Dean. Yeah. So, anyways, he was my college coach, and I had a good relationship with him. We stayed in touch, and I ended up coaching. I went back to my alma mater. I did a few other jobs in between from college to my alma mater. I went back coaching at Calvary Chapel High School, where I graduated from, and I coached there for about 6 years. And from there, I moved to Cal Baptist University. I was an assistant coach to Lenny Zaleski, and we had some great teams over there. Took third at D2 Nationals 2 years in a row there at the end of it. And then the school was in the middle of transferring into D1s, and I started my own program at Life Pacific University. Anyways, I left Life Pacific University to start working at Nuway. Dave Dean I started helping him organize some jiu-jitsu tournaments. That was going to be my initial job at Nuway. Anyways, from there, I just ended up moving on from coaching and helping organize all the Nuway events. And my job at Nuway events, the beginning was to add jiu-jitsu and slowly add other sports. So we added jiu-jitsu. We did a bunch of judo events. We haven't done one in a year or so. We do arm wrestling events, and we also do youth MMA, pancration.
And you know, I think you've kind of seen a shift over, you know, the past couple of years with Nuway, just as an outsider. Years ago, like I remember you guys did a tournament in Kentucky that was really cool in Louisville. That was like a state-based like wrestling.
Yeah.
And that was really cool. We went up there one year with Georgia. You know, Georgia, we took a team. It was all Georgia kids. And then, you know, that was really kind of cool. And we wrestled some good kids up there, like the Bickertons. We wrestled both the Bickerton boys back then. And, like, you know, that was a really good event. And it's kind of shifted from Nuway Wrestling into this combat kind of space. And you've kind of seen it just with the branding and marketing over the past couple of years. And I'm guessing that's you're doing, right?
I wouldn't take credit for all of it, but it definitely helped with a lot of it. One of the reasons that the state-based nationals it was becoming really hard for coaches to build teams only from their state. That's kind of the pushback we got, and it was becoming harder for our travel coaches to build teams from their state only. You know, let's say a tournament's if it's in Kentucky. The specific one, most of the travel coaches, they'll bring 5-6 kids with them, and then the rest of their team, the other 8-9 kids, they would recruit from the specific state. So when they're not allowed to recruit from that specific state, it's harder for them to, you know, recruit 15 kids from their state and have them travel so far. So that's kind of what happened with that event.
I always had this thought, and I kind of figured as much, you know, because it was even hard for like us to put a Georgia team together, right? Like, so I always figured like a couple years ago, last year, Bryson went up to Iowa for AAU Nationals. They had like a national duel or something with Team Tennessee. Well, we live in Georgia, but I guess they were allowed like 3 border state kids.
Yeah, like 3 wild cards or something.
Yeah, like they had to be bordering states from what I understand, right? Like, so for Tennessee, it'd be like Kentucky, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, you know, bordering states. So I think that could be a really cool idea, just off the top of my head. Like, if you had it would be more like a regional type thing, right? Yeah. I think that could be really neat, where if you got coaches, I'm just making this example up from like down here, but like, there's training centers. There's one in Chattanooga. There's one down in Dalton. There's a ton in Atlanta. They're all over the place, right? They're up in Knoxville. So, like, if you were to set up a tournament where it could be a tri-state type thing, I don't think there would be that pushback where you could pull from like bordering states.
I think we had for state-based nationals for that tournament, we had 3 wild cards where you can have, you know, 3 kids that don't have to be from your state, and we didn't even put restrictions on it where it has to be a border state. We just said you can have 3 wild cards. I like the idea. I like the concept of it. I love what USA Wrestling is doing with the duels that they do. I've competed in this in 1998 when they first started. You know, like the junior duels and cadet duels. And I thought those tournaments were a lot of fun. In 3 days, I think it was the first year that they did it. If anybody's watching this, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was the first year they did it. It was in Oklahoma. And I got 24 matches in 3 days. I wrestled freestyle and Greco. So you get a lot of matches in at those duels. And that's, you know, and you can only have, it's only your state that represented. So I thought it was a great concept. I think it's works well with high school level like that, but it's pretty tough at youth level because, you know, high school level, you have a lot of the coaches organizing it. At youth level, you have a lot of parents organizing it, and that could be a little bit tough.
Those are amazing events, the Freestyle Greco National Duels. Those are great. I'll say this. I think from our experience in them, over the last couple of years or whatever. I think they should add a day to it, where just like you said, where you're cramming 24 matches into 3 days. When you're there from 6 a.m. till like 11 o'clock at night, dude, that's brutal.
It makes for tough days. Yeah.
Yeah, that's brutal, man. Like, I remember I think it was 2 summers ago, we were on the 14U team for Georgia, and we were in Oaks, Pennsylvania. And the Greco day, we lost to California, but it was tight. And then we was trying to battle back, and I think we got knocked out by like Illinois, I think, right, in Greco. And
tough freestyling Greco State.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And we were battling back. We were 1 match out of placing top 8 in Greco. Well, we ended up having, I think, 7 matches that day in Greco. So that was a long day, but we got out of there. We were there like 6 a.m. We got out of there about 4:30. Well, the next day started freestyle, okay? So we upset Utah, which should have never happened in 100 years, okay? It come down to the last 2 matches, and the match before us, he won, and then Bryson beat a kid he should have never beat, and then the kid that was behind us we needed a pin, and by God, he got the pin.
Yep, nice.
And we won by 1 point over Utah. Should have never happened in a million years. Of course, then we hit this was in pool play or whatever, and then we ended up with Illinois, and they smoked us in freestyle, but we ended up placing 8th. But we ended up wrestling from 6 o'clock in the morning till it was like 9 o'clock. Like, you're talking 15 hours. And dude, by 1, 2 o'clock, you're like done. Like, it's just tight. I think it needs another day to like spread it out a little bit. I think that'd be a better product. But other than that, it's a great tournament.
Yeah, it's tough. And it's fun too. You get a lot out of it. And the particular kid that you talked about, he got a pin for you guys to win the duel. Those kinds of moments, that's what you really remember from wrestling, like just stepping out, winning a duel match for your team. What a cool feeling for that kid.
Yep. I remember stuff. That's all I really remember from, my son coming up through the youth stuff. Actually, at that event, the kid that he upset, the kid blast doubled him. I'll send you a clip of this. You'll be like, dude, that's cool. Because I don't know how he did it to this day. It's like Spider-Man. The kid blasts him and lifts him in the air, and somehow he finagled out of it, caught an ankle, and scored off of it. And like, you see the bench jump up and go crazy, and there's a few seconds left, and he ended up beating the kid by like 2 or something. And then the kid behind us, Tanner Hunt, I'll give a shout out, Tanner Hunt. He's a kid. He's from Jefferson, Georgia. He's a stud, man. He come behind us. And he cut a little bit, but he didn't cut a lot. So he was undersized at like 97 or whatever weight it was. And, dude, he knew we needed a pin, and he had no fear. He went out there and stuck that kid. And I'm like, his dad's over there turning cartwheels. Dude, it was a cool moment, man. It really was.
Great.
So, Nuway, I'm actually curious now. You kind of told me how you went, kind of how you got hired in. Where did the concept for Nuway, there had to be a reasoning why it become a thing. Like, what was the reasoning behind the creation of Nuway?
I got to ask Dave a little bit more detailed about it, but I think at that time, the way the company started, it was a state association in Michigan, and it was just to give the kids more opportunity to wrestle folk style matches.
Okay, so it was kind of like where like Tennessee has an AAU and South Carolina uses USA. They just kind of created their own, and it kind of
their own, yeah, and just give more options. Mostly, I don't remember when I was young. When I was in high school, I graduated high school in '98. Really wasn't much off-season folk style tournaments. You would wrestle folk style basically from September to March, whatever, depending on when your state tournament is. And afterwards, kids started wrestling freestyle. And Nuway, it's mostly folk style tournaments, and it was a state association. And our company's we still have few state associations, but our goal isn't to start new state associations. Our goal is to do national level events.
What's the process like in choosing cities, right? Like, because I know you guys come to Gatlinburg, which is like 2 hours from us. I know you do stuff in Michigan and you did Kentucky, and like what's the process like in choosing cities to put tournaments on?
We like to find places where it's also fun for families to visit. So that's one of the things we look for. But if we're always looking to add events, but whenever we do look to add event, one thing we'll look at it is how close is it to our events, and then how let's pick any state. Let's pick Nebraska, right? So we'll look at state of Nebraska if we want to add a tournament there. Well, is there within that month? Is there already a big established tournament? If so, we're trying to stay away from it. Just the space for wrestling, for having good tournaments, it just really doesn't work well to add a tournament on top of already established wrestling event. It does a couple things. One, it dilutes both tournaments, and number two, it just really no reason doing that. If you care for wrestling, let that tournament be big. You could start a tournament next month in that same set, and that won't affect anybody. That's kind of a philosophy. That's the way we look at those events.
There is it is a thing like down here in the South, like up until the last, like I'd say 5 to 7 years. I'd say before that, like summer wrestling wasn't really. You had to travel a long way from the South to get matches, right? Like at all, and it's one of those things where recently, there's starting to be more down here, and you guys have been to Tennessee now several years in a row, which has been very helpful for our youth kids and up. I think that in our demographic down here, and I'm just going to, throw this out here from like, North Carolina above Kentucky down, down to like Louisiana, this Southeast area. I know that there's like Mississippi just had their first high school state tournament, like a year ago, right? So they're starting to get big with wrestling. They're starting to build wrestling in their state. Louisiana's starting to build now. If you follow SE Wrestle, if you don't, I think you should follow at SE Wrestle. He does an amazing job at covering all these states. And dude, I'm telling you, I think that if you guys ran in the summer in the South, they would all be just blown up because there's training centers all over the place. And most kids that are serious, they train through the summer. And I think the Southeast could really, down here, I think in the summertime, I think it would do really well. That's just my opinion, though. But I think summer wrestling's getting bigger and bigger in the South, like it's always been in like Pennsylvania and Ohio and those states.
Our partners kind of, it's a different company, but we do a lot of shares events with them. I'm going to give a little shout out to them. It's called War Promotion. They're out of South Carolina, out of Myrtle Beach area, and they just started doing a tournament series out of Georgia. So it's War Promotion. If you're, I'm sure you have a lot of people listening to it from Georgia. They do great events. They run their events identical to the way they do. It's amazing staff. So if and they're doing a great job already over there. So it just doesn't really make sense for us to go into that to a market where we have partners already that are doing a good job there. And I'm not saying we'll never partner up with them to do a big event there. Most likely will, but they're doing a great job, and they're partners with us on South Carolina tournament. It's called Southern Throne, and then we have 2 tournaments in Gatlinburg. It's called the Bootlegger and the Bear Tournament.
Yeah, I've Bootleggers. Yeah, I've seen that. And the Southern Throne, I think we wrestled in that several years ago. I know the War Promotions, Gerald Carr runs the Storm Center down in Perry, Georgia.
Yep, he goes to all our tournaments.
Yeah, he actually, this last preseason tournament he did was by that War Promotions down there in Perry. They ran it out of that Ag Center down there.
Yeah, is that Category 5?
The Cat 5 tournament he does. Yeah.
Yeah,
so that was pretty cool. Yeah. Dude, I'm really curious, though, man. How did, we're kind of getting a background on you. Where did this social media technique of the week, the whole branding, dude, you're almost like a character, right? Like with your social media, you're almost like this unique character. And where did this come from? Like, where did you decide, like, hey, I got a lot of knowledge here and I've learned from a lot of great coaches and people, and I want to share this. Like, where did that come from?
So it started out as I shouldn't say a joke, but it started out as a fun thing for me to do. I started missing coaching. So I wanted to coach I just wanted to show wrestling technique. And I'd go to different high schools where I live and try to help out, go to different jiu-jitsu gyms, work out with different guys. So I wanted to start posting I had an idea to post one technique a week and call it a technique of the week. And I would just record it after practice, post it. And I had, when I first started doing this, I had maybe 1,500 followers on Instagram, and I'm not a social media guy. I guess I am now. I pay attention to it a lot more. So I just posted a video once every couple of weeks or so, call it technique of the week. And one day I'm traveling and I get a lot of notifications on my Instagram. I look at my following, like, holy cow, there's 8,000 followers. Like, it happened without me really realizing what was happening. So I would say maybe within 3 weeks, maybe a month, it just grew to that big. So then it just became it's been a lot of fun for me posting those videos. And what makes it fun for me, I feel like I'm coaching to a really big audience. I get a lot of messages, a lot of DMs asking technique, asking how to run practice, a kid struggling with his weight cut, all kinds of wrestling questions that you could think of. I get asked now, and I make videos accordingly. So that's what happens. And the knowledge I have for wrestling, I had my first coach was my dad, and then the club I went to in Armenia, there was 2 Olympic medalists that came out of there and 7 world medalists that came out of that club. And it was a Greco wrestling. So and it was the same coach in Armenia. When you go to a club, it's not like you go to a different youth club, then you go to high school, different high school coach, a different college coach. It's the same coach runs practice for all levels. So beginners, he has a practice, for example, 3 to 4, and then cadet guys, 15, 16, they'll be 5 to 6, and then so on till senior level. So it's the same coach that coaches you your whole career. So I started out learning from the same coach that was coaching Olympic champions. That was my first coach. And then in high school, I had John Azevedo, junior college, Paul Kisa, Michigan State. I had Roger Chandler, Dave Dean, Tom Minko, all Americans in college. And also wrestled the Olympic Training Center a lot. So wrestled with some of the best guys in there. I would go do camps over there. So I had been really blessed to have all those amazing coaches. So where I get my technique. So it's not because of this amazing wrestler. It's because I had this amazing coaches that just guided me throughout my career. So having all this knowledge and showing technique, it's been a lot of fun. So growing the page, and what I like to do is grow Arsen Combat page to a wrestling help page. Anybody that wants to know anything about wrestling, anybody that wants to learn about wrestling, join in, ask me. I'm here to help.
Dude, I love that. And I always try to share all your stuff. I think they're great. I think I want to get them out to as many people as I can. I got a curiosity question because of something you said that kind of caught me there. Yeah, and it's cool how you worded it. You're like, okay, we have a beginner class. This is Armenia. When you were talking about Armenia, that's like 4 to 5, and then you had cadets 5 to 6. I was listening to a Flow Wrestling podcast a few weeks ago about Japan and how, they had that kid that just exploded this year in one of the lightweights. I can't pronounce his name.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah. I can't say his whole name, but, yeah. And how they were talking about volume, right? And how the volume in Japan is vastly greater than what the United States guys are doing, right? Like in terms of, live wrestling practice, so on and so forth. So like on average here in the United States, now this is just an average. This isn't every club. But like, for instance, we go to the Minion Training Center in Chattanooga. They practice 4 days a week, 2 hours a day, right? And you can also jump into early practice, for an hour for like a small group kind of thing. So you're averaging, 8 to 10 hours of practice a week, 4 to 5 hours alive. You're talking about, youth kids to high school. So with that being said, is that close to what it was like in Armenia, or did you guys practice every day, shorter periods, or like how was that structured over there?
I think my workouts for that age was we had 3 workouts a week, and I think it was about an hour and a half each workout. The system, especially this is under USSR, so all those clubs, there's 6 major clubs, right? And they're all funded by government. So it's not like my dad didn't pay for me to go wrestle. It's a government club. The club I went to is called Dinamo. And they had Dinamo club in every republic, and a bunch of them in like former USSR republics. So the coaches there are getting paid by the government. It's a really good paying job. So people do want to be a coach. So if it's a good paying job, it pays above the national average what people are making. And this is under communist regime too. So if it pays that well, you're going to get the better coaches to coach. So right away, when you start wrestling in Armenia or, any of the Georgia, Azerbaijan, any of the, Russia, you don't start with somebody that hasn't had wrestling experience or coaching experience. All the coaches are professional coaches that are getting paid by the government. So you're getting some of the best coaches. So think of it at our college level. If you get, a guy like Doc Schwab, he's only coaching a club, and he's coaching the kids with his system from age 7 all the way to their seniors. So the kids never learn bad technique. They don't have bad habits. We're here, and I'm not knocking on dads here or coaches who don't have wrestling experience. I've seen some great guys, great coaches that have never wrestled. The high school team needed a coach. If they didn't have a coach, they're going to drop it. So the dad jumps in, brings a young assistant coach. I've seen that, and I appreciate those guys very much. So I'm not knocking on those guys. But you don't have anything like that in those countries. From the day you start wrestling for a guy has a kid that competed in world championship, that has a kid that's won, the Armenian nationals or Georgian nationals. So that's kind of how the system works over there. So it's not so much the amount of hours you train, not so much how hard you train, it's the quality of your training, what you're learning from day one. And I think that's more important than just training really hard. In wrestling, training really hard, you have to train really hard. You have to be in amazing shape. But you can train really hard and not see results if you're not developing your technique in the areas that you need to improve on. You could start like, I'm going to train really hard to win my next match. You're really struggling to get off the bottom, but you're doing a whole lot of sprints. Sprints are hard to do. Is that going to help you to get off the bottom? It would help you be in better shape so you can fight a little bit longer, but it won't. It's not, your training has to be specific to your sport and specific to the areas you're struggling in. And I think Japan does that really well. I think if you watch them, Kyle Dake, the way he lost to Japanese, it's clear that they out-scouted us. He finished on Kyle Dake right away. You stay on Kyle Dake's legs, you're going to get rolled up. Got on his legs, came up right away, finishing, didn't stay on the ground. It looked like they were trained well, and I shouldn't say they worked harder than us. I would say they probably trained smarter than us, or not us, but just against the whole world.
You were saying, like running sprints doesn't necessarily, how's that going to help me if I'm struggling on bottom? I mean, you're completely right. I had Matt Pitts was Bryson's wrestling coach growing up. He was a Southern Conference champ at.
I'm sorry, who?
Matthew Pitts. He wrestled for Brands at Chattanooga years and years ago, and he won the Southern Conference. He runs Grindhouse Wrestling Club down here in North Georgia. He's been around a long time. Great dude. He's like a brother to me. I love that guy. Shout out Matt. he told me one time we were sitting on the wall. We used to have these like come to Jesus like talks about crazy wrestling dad and wrestling coach kind of thing that we were talking about earlier. And he says, dude, he goes, you can get in shape wrestling. This whole, we're going to run 6 miles before we warm up, and like you get in shape wrestling. And dude, that's kind of like for years I've watched that. Like, you jog and, you might do a few sprints or whatever, but like wrestling's hard. So like if you're struggling with something, you're going to get in shape by drilling that. And I completely agree with what you're saying. So I think it's amazing that you have a situation over there where you're from, where you start out with, like you were saying, high level coaching from the time you're walking, and it's just a repeated process. Like in the United States, man, we don't have that, obviously, like a government funded job for a sport. Like it's not a thing. Now over here, if you can run a 4.2, you're going to get millions of dollars to try to catch a football, right? That's how the United States is built, right? So that's just it seems like an amazing like kind of circumstance that you took from your youth into coming here and seeing like, the difference. So it's cool how you can compare that. But something I want to ask you is, obviously you were training freestyle over there, correct?
Greco. I started with Greco.
Okay. So, but the Olympic styles of wrestling. So When did you first see folk style, and what was your thoughts on folk style?
So my first folk style tournament, my first tournament in America. We got a USA, and we're new in America. We're maybe 6 months in. I can't remember how long we've been in America. My dad doesn't speak English at all. He knows a handful of words. I can get by a little bit, handful of words. We got a USA Wrestling magazine, and we saw a tournament in San Diego. So we drove to San Diego, started wrestling. My first match, I get a takedown. As soon as I get a takedown, the kid stands straight up. I lock my hands behind him, back arch, 5-point, just, Greco background, and the kid just jumps up. Like in the middle of it, I'm like, this kid sucks at wrestling. Nobody does this. Back arch, full on back arch. And then the referee blows the whistle, and he starts yelling at me. And I know they're upset, but I can't really understand what they're saying. And my dad starts yelling because they give the other kid a point, and it's like, hey, so we started getting an argument. Anyways, I'm like, whatever. Like, Americans are so weird. That's not how this works. So the kid goes back down on the mat, and I go ref freestyle, freestyle, optional start again. And then this time the kid got shooken up pretty hard. It was a pretty hard back arch throw, so the kid doesn't jump up, but I jump on top of him. I lock my hands, I gut wrench him. They stopped the match again. They gave the kid another point, and I can't really understand what's going on, or kind of yelling. Anyways, to make the long story really short for time's sake, the match ends. I get disqualified for gut wrenching the kid too much. I'm throwing a fit, but I think at this time my dad's kind of figured out like maybe the rules are something off. There's a famous coach in San Diego. His name is Ruben Leon. Coached the No Mercy Wrestling Club, and he officiated a lot of freestyle and Greco matches. And he realizes like they don't speak English. They probably have no idea what this sport is. So the tournament I entered was a folk style tournament, and I've wrestled. I had no idea what the rules were. Had no idea you couldn't lock hands. So Ruben Leon pulled us aside and kind of explained to us, and I'm trying to translate this to my dad with my bro, as much as I can understand from Ruben. Anyways, if you understood, you couldn't lock hands, and that's my first folk style experience. That's how I got experience with collegiate wrestling in America. So.
How long do you think it took you to kind of get the grasp on that? And what do you think, as somebody being from another country, right, where every country but the United States wrestles, Greco and freestyle? What do you think of folk style? Do you feel like the United States should shift to full-time freestyle, or do you think it's unique and a good thing for the sport?
I think it's very unique. Most countries have their own style of wrestling, right? Iran has their own style of wrestling. Armenia has their own style of wrestling. Mongolia has their own style of wrestling. If you look at it, all the African countries, they have their own style of wrestling. Papua New Guinea has their own style of wrestling where they wrestle kind of hanging from the trees, pulling each other down. So I think it's great to have folk style wrestling in America to kind of, it's our identity. That's what we have. Obviously, if we switch it to freestyle wrestling only, United States will be dominant at a world level. If you learn how to gut wrench, fight the top bottom wrestling, we will dominate the world level in a very short time. The problem if we switch to freestyle wrestling only during high school or college, we will kill wrestling in America. You don't have average high school coach has not wrestled freestyle match or Greco match. So now you're asking all those coaches to learn a new style and coach. Would the shift happen in 20 years? We'll get that many coaches? Yes. But now even officiating, when I help find referees for our tournaments, we do freestyle also. So let's say on an average weekend, I hire a 50 official. There may be only 5-6 of them that can officiate freestyle or Greco. So there's got to be a lot of training to change the entire country to wrestle freestyle. We just don't have enough knowledge in the coaches, officials to be able to make that switch. So I think that's be the reason what I would say we shouldn't do that. Do I think if we do that, the ones that know how to coach would be much better? Absolutely.
I also think that, and this is no knock on freestyle and Greco because, I love freestyle and Greco, but I feel like folk style is more exciting. I think there's more of a excitement factor there. There's it just, to me, like, I'm just going to throw out a scenario. Like, you're down by 1, it's going into the third, that kid picks bottom, you're on top, and you get like a quick tilt, right? And then the place erupts or whatever, right? It's just different, right? Where you can choose top, bottom, neutral. It just adds a different dynamic where freestyle is kind of a little more stationary in a way. And I feel like that it brings like an excitement that, and freestyle is exciting, don't get me wrong, but I just feel like folk style's got more of this like unpredictability to it compared to freestyle. That's just my opinion as a fan, right? Just as a fan watching the sport, I would rather, as a United States wrestling fan, I would rather watch folk style than freestyle. Granted, that was going to be my next question. Do you think if we did do that, would we dominate on the world scene? And you answered that before I could ask. I think there should be – I think it would be interesting. And now this is hypothetical and it'll probably never happen. But can you imagine if other countries in the world started wrestling folk style, how interesting that would be to watch folk style wrestling in the Olympics? How interesting would that be?
Be fun. I think about it often where, you bring a Russian world champion and you put him in a folk style wrestling season. How would they do? And I think obviously they would do really well in matches, but what happens if, college wrestling, NCAA wrestling it's really tough. D1's really tough. You get into Big Ten, that kind of schedule. It's really tough. So if you bring a Russian world champion, you put him in a Big Ten school and he wrestles with that schedule and training that hard, making weight twice a week, would they last? Would they last that 3 months with that kind of training, with making weight like that? Because they don't train like that. They train for a handful of tournaments a year. Where our college guys, you get we have so many college guys that are making the world team, winning an Olympic medal, winning a world medal, and they go back and they still wrestle in college. Think of how many matches they put in throughout the year and making weight that many times. It's pretty impressive. I think folk style is a really tough wrestling. It's a tough style of wrestling.
You pointed out something that I say all the time. Not just college, but high school kids. If you look at high school kids, that I put up a poll about 3 days ago because I was curious what I'd see, and it blew me away that I asked, how much weight do you cut during the season, right? So an average high school season is typically what, November to like March-ish, something like that.
Right.
So you're looking at right. So in 4 months, I'm just going to throw out a scenario. You're probably wrestling twice during the week and like team duels, and then wrestling maybe a tournament on the weekend. So I'm just making this up. But so 3 weigh-ins a week. And if you're having to maintain like 10 to 12 to 15 pounds down, for one, you're going to feel like crap for 4 months. 2, you're not going to perform to your best of your ability because you're completely dehydrated all the time for 4 or 5 months. And for college guys that are, adults at that point, right? Guys in college are essentially adults. I think they can handle that a lot better than a 14-year-old freshman or a 16-year-old junior or whatever. So I put up a poll and I said, how much weight do you cut during the season? 38% I had like 280 something votes, right? 38% said 10 pounds or more. Now, that was the highest percentage of the options, 38%. And it made me think, it's like, I understand, 4 to 6 pounds, something reasonable. But when you're making now in a high school season, we're looking at a high school season. Obviously, if you go to Super 32 or, whatever, you're going to cut down, get into a better weight. But when you're weighing in, on a Tuesday, a Thursday, and a Saturday, and you're cutting 10 to 15 to 20 pounds, I just don't see that being feasible. What's your thoughts on that?
5, 6 pounds, or even 10 pounds, depending on the weight, right? You have a 103 pounder. If he's cutting more than 5 pounds and he's already lean, that's a lot of weight for him. We had you're 189 or 100, once whatever, 175 pounder, 189 pounder. 8, 9 pounds of water weight practice isn't that bad for you. You can do that. You can lose the weight day before. You don't drink water that night. You're on weight next morning. But you get a 112 pounder, 113 pounder that's already lean without any body fat. You get that kid losing 5 pounds and he has to make weight that many times a year. It's just not. I don't think it's beneficial for them. I think concentrating on, when you're cutting weight, and I've cut weight, pretty hard a few seasons throughout my career. When you're cutting hard, it's really hard to improve during season. And you see that a lot. Kids that are cutting weight, they come in beginning of the season, they're ranked number 1 and they're killing everybody. As the season goes on, that weight cut starts getting to them. They start feeling worn out. They get tired, and they just don't improve throughout the season. Now they're looking forward to end the season, so their misery with being, hungry and thirsty the whole season is over, and they just want one out. So I think weight cutting, you have to cut weight in wrestling, but you got to get really lean, and to lose 6, 7 pounds of water weight in high school, I don't think that's bad. But you get kids that are cutting crazy amount of weight that are already lean, and they're just sucking all the water out of them. It just doesn't help you with your performance. It doesn't help you improve end of the season.
No, and something nobody really ever talks about is high school age kids, they're growing at that point, right? Like they are right, like freshmen, 8th grader, 9th graders, freshmen, 8th graders, they're like hitting puberty as they're entering high school. So, you see kids that were, I'm just going to make this up, 75 pounds in 8th grade that are 120 in 9th grade, right? Over the summer, they grow 5 inches. And, when your body starts producing testosterone and things like that, I think when you overcut, and I'm with you, 6, 7 pounds of water, that's no big deal. On most kids, like you said, a lean 103, that'd probably be tough, like, 10 pounds down or whatever at 113 down. But my point being is like every year and I'm watching this and this is from a dad perspective, just seeing it. Like every year, Bryson started hitting growth spurts at the worst times, right? Like at the worst times. He's walking around at a good weight where it's a few pounds down. We feel good. And all of a sudden, boom, he shoots up 4, 5, 6 pounds, and he grows a few inches. That's kind of hard to maintain. And I think it's because of the length of, the folk style season, like when it starts and, but during that time, 4 or 5 months to a young kid like that in that age group, they're going to grow in that time. So if you're overcutting, it can also cause, I feel like, issues with growth. Like you see kids, man, you see all the time that are very small and they got cauliflower ear, right? They're very small. And you look at, their parents, their dad's 6'4" and their mom's 5'9" or whatever on the big end of women, and they're tiny and they're skinny and they've been cutting weight, like excessive weight, for 10 years or 15 years or whatever. So I think there has to be a happy medium. That's all I'm saying with weight cutting, like a happy medium, be smart about it. This 10, 15, 20-pound cuts for high school kids, man, I just think is just not in any way beneficial to anyone.
Yeah, it's too much. It's even sadder during youth wrestling too. I just see parents making the kids cut weight. It's hard for me to stomach it. Watching like, well, he cut 5 pounds. Like, well, that's almost 50% of his body weight. And I'll say it. I'll give advice. Like, you shouldn't be cutting that much weight. It's not going to help him. It's not going to help him to improve his wrestling for his career. Throughout my coaching career at Calvary Chapel High School and at Call Baptist and Life Pacific, I bumped kids up from their weight classes, and I would normally, work out with them, help them cut weight. And working out with the kid, he hasn't lost more than a pound in an hour and a half workout. He just, it's not working out. Like, hey, man, you could be an All-American at a weight class above. And I had a handful of kids that happened. I'll name one specific example, a kid named Brady Bersano. He tried to make 149 pounds. Just I thought he was going to die. And we made the duel, and I walked up to my boss at that time, Lenny. I was like, Coach, we can't have him make 149s anymore. Just too much. Like, all right. Afterwards, we bumped him up. He ended up taking second at D2 Nationals at 157. Had he stayed at 49s, I don't know if he would have finished the season. I don't know how he would have felt being that skinny. When all you really care about is making your weight, then you're not going to finish the season well.
Yeah, I had about 15, 20 podcasts back. I talked to Jastatine, I can't say his last name, Kizawamba, something like that. His family was African. They're from the state of Kentucky, and he wrestles for Cumberland's out in Kentucky, or in Tennessee. He's at the Cumberland's in Tennessee. And I asked him about his weight, and he said, man, he goes, my whole life they've cut me 10, 15 pounds, whatever. He said, this summer I was wrestling with a guy that was like a D2 national champ or an NAIA national champ, whatever he said. And he said, dude, he goes, I didn't cut weight in college. He said, at all. He goes, I didn't. He said, I felt good all the time. And he said, you know what I'm going to do? I weigh 167. I'm going to wrestle 165. And I've been keeping track of him all season, dude. And he's beat some D1 guys. And it's like, you know what? Like, there's something to be said for your health, right? Like feeling good, blood sugar levels. There's a lot that goes into that. So I agree with everything you said there, man. Like sometimes, maybe you work to grow into your weight class. Maybe that's the approach to take, especially for high school kids. I think that's the best route. Dude, I have had a great conversation with you, Arsen. This is awesome. We've learned so much cool stuff, man, and we've debated on different, avenues and different coaching philosophies from country to country. This has been really cool.
Thank you, Jesse. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I really appreciate it, man. Before we go ahead and tell everybody that's going to see this how they can follow you and get your tips and all your information and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I have an Instagram page, TikTok page, and YouTube. It's called Arsen Combat, ARSEN Combat. I post, daily, just all kinds of different techniques, and reach out if you have any wrestling questions, anything related to wrestling. With tournaments I run, we do about 20 events a year. We're all over the country. Typical, talk a little bit about my job at Nuway. Typical tournament, if you double bracket, if you wrestle 8U and 9U duels and you do the individual tournament, you could walk away with close to 15 to 17 matches. Our schedule's online, newwaycombat.com. Yeah, that's all I got. Thanks for having me, Jesse. Look forward. Maybe we'll do this again next year, and looking forward to playing with with the cards you came up with. So
yeah, man. I keep meaning. I'm going to get you a hard copy of the rules so you can kind of read through it.
All right, thank you. When I'm home, I don't have a lot of wrestling people around me to play with it. When I'm traveling with the tournaments, we're all over the place. But I will find some of my wrestling buddies will play with it, and I'll stay in touch with you.
Yes, sir. Episode 37 of the B Money Beastin' Podcast in the books.